Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and company doing great things remotely. And today I have something a little different for everybody. Today on the line I have Jerry Koch-Gonzalez. And Jerry, you're in Amherst, Massachusetts in the US. And you are the CEO of the Sociocracy Consulting Group. So that's very interesting. We're going to get into that. So welcome. And I want to start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Mm-hmm. Well, with the Sociocracy Consulting Group, our virtual office is Zoom. We meet on Zoom, and the core group of us is 8 people. We're scattered in 3 countries. And then we are also related to our kind of a parent or sister organization, the Sociocracy Group, which is more global, has 2 other divisions, so even more scattered around the world. And most people work from their home offices or sometimes in some other place, in some office building, but we all come together for our meetings on Zoom.
Okay.
So we make we are organized, the Sociocracy Consulting Group is organized into 5 teams, the same 8 people kind of just scattered in different, with different focus. All those groups meet on Zoom, and we do online training classes. So a good part of our work is also done on, in this medium through the Zoom software, which works really well because you can see everybody. It's such a great improvement over phone conferencing.
Oh my,
when you
yes.
actually see people, see their emotions, notice if they're paying attention or not, and to be able to do breakout rooms. So we do a lot of meetings, a lot of decision making, a lot of training through Zoom.
Yeah, I have to say it is definitely my favorite video conferencing tool. I've used everything that I know out there. And I'm not getting paid by Zoom to say this yet. Maybe we'll do an affiliate program soon, but it is by far the best. So, and the breakout rooms indeed are really fantastic. I'm going to ask you about the online training courses because I have questions about that. But I first want to talk to you about sociocracy. Is there a 2-minute definition? That I know it's a big topic. The quick version of what sociocracy is, just for the context for the listeners.
Yeah. So sociocracy is basically an approach to governance. So the ocracy, like democracy, autocracy, governance, and social, those who work together. So it's governance by those who work together. And what that means in practice is that we, there are 3 core elements. We work in teams that we call circles, and those circles are linked to each other. If it's a vertical organization, so that there's layers, there would be a double link, like leader top down, but there would also be a delegate bottom up, so that all the circles are doubly linked. And within each circle, the decisions are made by consent, a little different than consensus and very different from voting. The trouble with voting is there's winners and losers. The challenge with consensus is sometimes just the inefficiency of trying to get to decisions. So the core principle in sociocracy is no one's ignored. Everyone has a voice. So we make decisions by consent in our teams. No one's ignored. We are double linked with the other circles if it's a vertical or more horizontal organization. So the voice can carry throughout the organization because of those links. So again, no one ignored. Sociocratic organizations, we're always focused on what is the aim, what is the purpose of our organization, and all the decisions then are focused on serving that purpose. Key questions about whether you consent or object to policy that we're trying to make that supports our work is, will this support our work towards the aim or not? That's kind of the key differentiator in making a decision.
Okay.
And try to be really clear about the difference between an objection, for example, and a preference.
Super interesting. So how do your meetings look different than other people's meetings? Because I'm sure you've attended some online meetings that are probably pretty different, and you think, oh, if they only ran them like we run them, how are they different?
Yeah. I think the central piece that distinguishes how we meet is the use of rounds. We go around. And
Okay.
Zoom is very good for that because you can see all the people in the boxes and you can go, okay, next, 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 next. So the decision-making process has multiple levels. When you have a proposal and you have a clarifying questions round, making sure that everybody on the team understands the proposal. So that's a round. Then you have the quick reaction. What do you think of this proposal? Like it, not, what are the pros and cons of it? And again, that's a quick reaction, 5 sentences or less. What's working for you about this? Where do you see challenges in this proposal? And then the consent round. Again, do I object? Do I consent? If I object, why? And if there's objections, then we do another round of, okay, what do we do with this objection? And see if we get some creative, solution out of that. So it's a lot of rounds because rounds support equivalence. Everybody's voice matters, and that's what rounds do. And we do that in our meetings just repeatedly, go through all the decisions and things that we need to do, including the beginning and closing of a meeting. We have an opening round at the beginning of the meeting, which just, how are you arriving at this meeting? Anything in your life that you want to share so that you're more present? Anything about this meeting in particular that is, raises either excitement or worry or whatever, tension. And we do a closing round in which we evaluate the meeting, what went well in terms of our product, in terms of our process. And that aspect of evaluating meetings is another very key part of sociocracy. The structure in circles, the decision-making by consent, and feedback to keep learning.
Oh, I love it. I mean, it's so often I hear about online meetings is that one of the main challenges is that there's somebody that takes over. There's, somebody who just talks too much. In fact, I have a special card for people who take over because it happens so much, which is the ELMO card, which stands for Enough, Let's Move On. So it sounds like your methodology, and that's for people who go on and on and on, and everybody's like, I get it, I want to move on. But it sounds like with your methodology, with these rounds during meetings, you wouldn't even have a need for something like that because it would just move on to the next person.
It just moves on. I think it's a bit of you onboard a culture of efficiency. So it takes a little while for people to get it. But once you've been to a couple of meetings and you understand, okay, I just wait for my turn to speak. Here's my turn to speak. No one's going to jump on me. No one's going to interrupt me.
So you
And
know that there's time for you. If you need to say something, there's no need to butt in like I just did. Sorry about that with you. Showing a bad example right away. But that I can rest easy knowing that my voice will be heard. I just need to wait for when my turn is to speak.
Right. Right. The facilitator, in a Zoom context, the facilitator is saying, okay, next, Lisette, and then Jerry. When Lisette finishes speaking, then the facilitator says Jerry, and then Francine. And so you're always calling the two people. They're getting ready. They're unmuting, if they need to, because maybe they have background noise. So we're working through that process. You always know who's going to be speaking. There's always time for you to speak. We know what we're speaking about because the facilitator is given a clear context for that round. What are we doing here? Are we doing a consent round, or are we doing a quick reaction round, or clarifying questions, or we're just doing an open space round of reflecting on some issue that we're considering?
Do you have the same facilitator each time, or does it change?
There's a particular process for selecting people into roles in sociocracy. Unlike, we don't vote for somebody and we don't have volunteers. We do a process of decision-making where, and this is done in the rounds. So we'll name what are the qualities that we're looking for in someone who's going to be a facilitator. And so people, usually it's, well-organized, can listen to people, can synthesize, those kinds of things. Those are the qualities of a facilitator. We've done this enough so that we don't repeat that step. But for people who are doing a new role, you'd name what are the qualities of that you're looking for in that role. And then everyone writes down, usually on their own piece of paper or mentally, who they nominate in the group for that role, for the facilitator. And we have tables. We use tables in our, we use Google Drive a lot. because we keep our minutes on Google Drive, we keep our minutes live. And so we write a table for the selection process right there with all the people in the group and who they're and they then write in who they're nominating. And then we do a round. Okay, Lisette, you nominated George because, tell us why. Jerry, you nominated Susan, tell us why. And so we go around the circle and everybody says who they nominated and why. Then facilitator says, having heard what you heard, are you moved to change your nomination? And we do a change round. Once the second round has come, the facilitator usually will say, okay, having heard what I heard, I propose, I'll propose George to be the facilitator, and we do a consent round. And that usually completes it. If there's an objection, then we work through to see if there's a way to turn the no into a yes, or perhaps go through another, propose somebody else. So that's how we select people to do roles like facilitation, again, using rounds. And the facilitator role will have a term. So it could be 6 months, it could be a year, 2 years for that particular team, and they're the facilitator. And there's somebody else, that's another interesting thing, that in sociocracy, the leader and the facilitator can be two different people. It could be the same person, but they could be two different people. Because sometimes the person who is good at leading and getting things done and moving people to get things done is not necessarily the skillful person at running meetings.
That totally makes sense. How long does it take somebody to learn how to facilitate a meeting in this way?
Oh, gee, that depends upon where they're starting from.
Starting from scratch, say for me, I've never done this before. How would I approach this? What would I do if I wanted to learn more? This probably should be the last question. What I always says, what if you want to learn more? But where does somebody start?
Well, yes, the Sociocracy Consulting Group runs 2 online classes. One is called the Foundations of Sociocracy, which goes through some simulations and explanations and practices to learn the kinds of things we've just been talking about. And then there is a follow-up class called Facilitating Sociocracy. So where there you get to practice all the situations and simulations of, okay, what do we do in this context? What do we do if this comes up? So it's a very practical, hands-on process. I'm also, I have another project which I do separately called Sociocracy for All. And that is coming from a more nonprofit perspective. We're just trying to bring sociocracy to as many people as we can. And in that project, we also do an online class. It's called the Sociocracy Leadership Training. And that is like a pop-up organization. Since it's kind of hard sometimes to learn sociocracy just by going to a workshop or just reading a book, it's so much easier to learn by doing. So we create a real organization that lasts for 9-10 weeks. We populate 3 or 4 different circles with the people who are in the class, and they have real work to do, which means they have to go through selecting their leader or delegate, their secretary, their facilitator. So they go through the selection processes. They go through decision making about how they want to do their work, and then they also carry out their work. So they're getting some training, they're learning by doing, and they're producing, actually what they produce in those circles is more information about sociocracy. So they have to learn it in order to pass it on. So those are ways of learning. We also do in-person workshops from time to time in different places. And there's lots of stuff online. You can go to my YouTube channel, the Jerry Koch-Gonzalez on YouTube, and you'll see a whole bunch of videos. Those are mostly produced by Sociocracy for All. And so you can watch those. And you can go to the websites, sociocracyforall.org or sociocracyconsulting.com. Bunch of information in those places.
So there's tons of information out there if people want to learn how to do it. There's no excuse, people. If you want to learn how, you can. The internet makes it hard to ignore.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask about your online training courses, because I also give online workshops, and I find that, in fact, I'm here in Sweden today. For most people that are watching the video that have seen the other videos, this is a very different background than what I normally have. I don't normally have deer on my wall. For those who are listening, there's a deer head hanging on the back of the wall. But I'm actually here because I offered to give a training course online, and the company opted to fly me to Stockholm instead to give it in person because they were so skeptical about the online training. And I thought, Your
Mm.
choice. I mean, it's better online. If you want to learn how to work online, you should do it online. But I think that with your online training courses, do you get a lot of, do you find that people are challenged by the fact that it's online?
The well, because of the way Zoom works and you see everybody, it's almost like you're in person. I mean, there's a really good quality about that. So you can really see each other, feel for, how people are reacting to what's going on, notice when somebody raises their hand, you can visually see a lot. So that's really helpful. We do international, our online courses are international. One of the challenges is just keeping time zones right.
Totally.
Here we go. We're in the U.S. We're about to go, fairly soon into changing from standard time to daylight savings time. Well, what does that mean to, Western Australia, where they don't change their time zone, but Eastern Australia they do, and Europe has got a different time when they switch over, and people people everywhere just have different time zones, and that's one thing you have to really pay attention to make
Indeed,
online classes work.
Europe changes 2 weeks before or after the US, I remember. And I know twice a year for those 2 weeks in between when it's daylight savings, all my meetings, I have to triple check everything.
Everything
Or
triple
it's
check.
just confusing. Indeed.
Yeah,
Yeah, time zones are just always confusing.
yeah.
But
And
indeed,
the other,
do you find people that are opposed to turning their video on? I hear that a lot from people, that it seems really personal somehow to turn your video on. Although I feel like showing up in person is far more personal than
Mhm.
being on video. But do you have that challenge as well?
Well, not the people who are coming to us are wanting to learn sociocracy. So that's not a problem because they are seekers. I think it might be different in a context where you're dealing with people who are not seekers, who don't necessarily want to, but feel like they have to for some reason. There's a difference between the phone conferencing and the video conferencing. Like right now, I can't be, shuffling my papers. I can't be going over there and getting some more food to eat because you're seeing me. I mean, I can, but I would just, it's like, oh, there goes Jerry, he's going off. But if it was a phone conference and you couldn't see me, like in the old days, I could be doing anything while the
Right.
meeting's just going on and on and on. And when meetings are fairly meaningless, the phone conferencing was kind of nice because, okay, I showed up, I did my duty, but I didn't have to pay attention because I could do other more important things. I could put on mute and I could vacuum, anything.
It's true.
But with
True. And
Zoom, you have
people
to be
did.
present. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and people did. So with video conferencing, you have to be present, you have to pay attention, and it also helps us be more effective and efficient because we don't want to waste our time. So um, let's get to it.
Indeed. So what are
And
some of
it's
the
also more
main,
personal, so just more community,
indeed.
just that I can, as you're interviewing me, I get to see you. So we're having a different kind of a relationship than if you were just a disembodied voice over the phone, especially if we've never met before. So we have no history. And a lot of online meetings, happen with people who don't know each other. So,
Indeed, I really find that when you only have five senses, I mean, there's and when you take an entire sense away, like sight, you lose so much, especially sight, because humans are visual creatures. We want to see
mhm.
the other person. We react to being seen. So yeah, I agree. I love the video function. It makes the meeting so much more fun to be able
Yeah.
to see everybody. It opens up a whole new form of office humor. You really get to know people in a different way. Indeed,
Mhm.
it's much people are much more engaged. What are some of the main challenges that you face then with this form of meeting facilitation?
The Well, technology is still a challenge, um,
Interesting.
because not everybody has got good bandwidth where they are. So when somebody's voice starts crackling, and the video pixels start going off, etc. Um, that kind of stuff is a challenge. Not many people are not technologically savvy, so that can be a challenge, especially when we're doing a training class that we're getting people who've never used something like Google Drive. And so how do I get on it? How do I find the folder? How do I find the documents? How do I write? Just the level of just getting up to speed with the technology poses an initial challenge to anybody who's not familiar with those things. But the actual meeting process, facilitating a meeting online, is, in some ways, I find it easier because people are less likely to interrupt. When you're in person and you've got a small group, people just, they just cut each other off. They talk, but if you cut each other off and talk online, you really can't hear what's being said. When 2 or 3 people talk at the same time online, I cannot hear what's being said. But when 2 or 3 people talk in person, I can still kind of make sense of what just happened. And then we can roll on. But online, you have to say, can you stop? And, Lisette, now you take your turn because I really want to hear what you are saying. So that's what's one little difference that I actually appreciate about online meetings.
That's true. People are much more careful in terms of interruptions. I think a lot of people wait. I know in some of the teams that I'm in, people will raise their hand when they want to speak, just to indicate that they want to speak. But I like this format of really giving everybody a voice in a meeting, only because I've heard so often from people that what they struggle with in meetings is unengaged participants and strong personalities. That is, that some people really give up because they're being pushed out, and some people are vacuuming or making lunch while they're on a call. In a video meeting, you can't quite get away with that as much. But yeah, so this sounds like a nice method.
The rounds are really important to that, because when your turn is going to come up and everyone is going to get heard. When you don't use the simple technology of rounds, then it's if you're in person, people just burst in, people just cut each other off and just go, unless they're being called upon by somebody. But even if you're being called upon, what happens is that the people who got a lot to say or want to push their point will speak and repeat themselves. They'll speak 3 times to say the same thing, as if repeating themselves would convince you. So they'll do that. Or the quiet people may not speak at all. If there are some people who jump in a lot, the quiet person might start talking, but if they pause for a moment, somebody else jumps in and they never get to finish what they were saying, because they think while they talk, whereas some just can do the motor mouth, just go. So there's beauty in both kinds of people, but the online rounds really supports the big talkers to take their turn, speak less. The people who talk less frequently or who need more space in which to talk have more kind of sacred space in which to come forth. So it's another way of saying it, the rounds, and especially online, helps equalize people's voices.
Do you find that this comes to me, let me start over and say, I would assume that this methodology would work very well across cultures, but that is an assumption. But it seems that there are some cultures that are less likely to speak up, for example, or there's some cultures that are more likely to just talk, like the motor mouth type. So I would assume that this really could come very well into play when we're talking about facilitating meetings with different cultures. Is that your experience also?
Yes, and there are still challenges of if you're really working with people who are very reticent to speak up, or who are in some traditional power over hierarchical context where speaking up is sort of dangerous and scary because the boss is listening. So how do you speak there? Those things do create tensions. People who tend to be in the interrupting the way to speak of the culture is kind of to move fast and interrupt a lot. Those folks can have a challenge in getting used to this system. But overall, for me, creating the context where everybody's voice matters does, again, in a sense, it equalizes the cultures, if you will, not just the individuals, but the cultures, creates more space for everyone. The largest sociocratic organization in the world does not meet virtually. They are the Children's Parliaments of India. And There are, at the village level, 30 kids from a particular neighborhood will sit together and they'll go through their meeting and decision making and selecting people for their roles. Some of those kids are not literate, but they're able to to function in a sociocratic manner in those meetings, taking their turns and doing their work. And that again also has levels from the neighborhood, from the neighborhood to the village to the regional level. So there are multiple levels in that context as well.
Super interesting. So I'm wondering, how did you get into this yourself? What was your stepping stone into doing this?
My stepping stone, for whatever reason exactly, I've always been interested in a sense of equality. I'm Cuban. I was born in Cuba, came to the US when I was 8 years old, learned English here. And I think there's a bit of that, of just having perspective coming from another culture. If you're only in one culture, sometimes that can limit your sense of perspective. But I got to hear two versions of history, the Cuban version, pre-Castro, and the US version. They didn't always match. So you have to think about those things. In a number of different other ways in my life, I was middle class in Cuba, more working class in the US. It was a bit of reflecting on that. So all the issues of race and class and gender and sexual orientation, all the things that help give perspective. I've gone through a lot of those questions, and so it's been important for me that to support the sense of equality, the sense of everyone having a voice, everybody's voice mattering. I became a social justice activist, and in that work, what we did was training. So it was three things that we cared about in this particular group that I was part of, Movement for a New Society, back in the 70s, 1970s, 1980s. And that one was community, our relationships with each other matter. One was direct action. So taking action for the things that you care about, in the style of, the civil rights movement in the US, Gandhi, King, Martin Luther King, and those kinds of things. And training, that you had to do skill development. You had to know, if you were going to protest, you had to know how to talk to the police, how to talk to the media, how to organize things in a nonviolent way, how to run meetings. And so then that's the piece that got me, how to run meetings. I was very interested in that. I was teaching consensus. I live now in a cooperative housing community here in Amherst. I've been living here for 22 years. Our co-housing community ran by consensus for the first 18 years, and then we switched to sociocracy. And so what happened is that part of my experience living in this cooperative housing community is that it was really hard to make decisions, because we live here, everybody, everything affects everybody. Everybody was trying to make decisions all together, which meant it was just a lot of people trying to make a decision. That's one challenge. Then some people weren't at those meetings or weren't part of the little group that developed a proposal, and somebody would show up at a meeting after a lot of work had been done and say, "Oh, I don't like that." And that was it. Consensus, you can't make a decision. You'd create a task group to try to work out the differences, and 3 months later the task group would stop meeting, and you wouldn't even know that it had stopped meeting, and nothing happened. So it turned out that the way we were using consensus, which I dearly love the idea of consensus, the way we were using it became very conservative, meaning it was very hard to change, very hard to make different choices over time. People would stop even generating proposals, because what for? Or you would, like, oh, I want to put out a proposal to renovate the basement of our community building. Well, do I want to put a year and a half of my life into that question? That's not a very interesting question to spend a year and a half of my life with.
Right. Right.
So no, forget it. So when I encountered sociocracy, which came through to me first, I learned it from the Zen Peacemakers, a group that was doing a training program nearby me, and we were exchanging some information. I went, oh, I like this model. And then I was also a trainer. I am a trainer in nonviolent communication. So the link between nonviolent communication and sociocracy, there was something happening there and something happening with co-housing communities. So suddenly all these three things that I cared about, co-housing, nonviolent communication, and sociocracy, were all connected with people who cared about all three. And I went, okay, I'm in. And
The
learned as much
perfect
as
storm.
I could, yeah, and helped our community transition to making decisions by sociocracy. And it's been great because now there's much more distributed leadership, which is again something that can happen online. You know, you've got all your different teams working online to make decisions. So we've got distributed leadership, more power in the small groups to get things done within the parameters of, you know, the limitations that we give each group. You know, you can make decisions up to this point on this issue, but within that point, you're free. Go do it.
Right.
So we've become more efficient, less troubled by issues, and more time to enjoy the sense of community with each other.
Well, and who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody wants to be bogged down in bureaucracy and strong personalities. And
Right.
yeah, indeed, indeed. It sounds like a co-housing situation is the perfect place to practice something like that, because that where you live is so important and so personal also, and people care a lot about it. So
Yes, they do.
I understand.
And it's an all-volunteer organization, so that has its
Wow.
own challenges. You know, we have no outside manager. We run our own. We run everything ourselves, including, you know, plowing the snow, or collecting the money from each other, etc. So all that work is organized, you know, in the circles, teams of people who are responsible for certain areas, and individuals who are responsible for certain tasks. Um, yeah, and so when I discovered sociocracy, then I very quickly started coming together with the other folks in the Sociocracy consulting group. We learned by working together, trying to generate our own, you know, consulting company. Given that we all were in love with this idea, and so we learned by working with ourselves.
And then spreading that out to other people, which I think is
Spreading that
awesome.
out, yeah. And
Makes
then,
me
you know,
want to learn this facilitation technique immediately to help all the online meetings. I mean, I must do 6 or 7 hours worth of online meetings a day sometimes. You know, usually sometimes the whole day is spent just sitting in meetings and talking. And I also have that feeling that nothing's getting done. I want to take action. I want to do something. So this sounds like a really great methodology. And we're coming to the end of our time, but I could talk to you forever about this. But I want to ask, if somebody were to start, what's the advice? We discussed this a little bit before, and you gave some websites, which I'll add to the show notes. But like as a very first step, what would you advise?
well, even if you don't, you know, you don't have to call it sociocracy. I mean, there's ways to learn the whole thing of sociocracy, and you'll put those in the show notes, sociocracyforall.org and sociocracyconsulting.com. You can go there and follow through with classes and materials. But the simplest thing I'd say for anybody who's listening here is, at any meeting, whether it's in person or online, you can just say, I'd like to hear from everybody on this. Could we do a round so we could hear from everybody?
Oh,
Simplest little thing.
let's do a round so
Yeah.
we can, I
I'd
love
like to
it.
hear from everybody. You know, this is an important issue, or, you know, there's people who've been speaking and people who've been quiet, and I'm really curious about what everybody's thinking. Can we do a round?
I like it. It also sounds really fun. It's like going for a round of drinks. Like, let's go, let's do
Yeah.
a round. Yeah. It can also, it feels very lighthearted, and it feels quick somehow,
Yeah,
just
and
to
you can
go
even
around.
give that. You can give that in that other additional piece. You know, let's make this pretty, you know, a short. You know, not to give everybody a big long speech, but, you know, quick, you know, 5 sentences or less. You know, just a few sentences about where you are at with this issue or with this topic.
Love it. Love it. It sounds like, I mean, a lot of my listeners are having some very painful online meetings. So
Mm.
I highly suggest they contact Jerry and they get involved and they at least learn some of these meeting facilitation tips, because I think it sounds like you're having some peaceful meetings. And I like the idea that everybody's voice gets heard. I think that's really important. Otherwise, the strongest personality wins, and that's not fair, because the strongest personality doesn't always have the best ideas. They just have the strongest personality.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for
All
your
right.
time today. I
Thank
really
you, Lisa.
enjoyed learning about this. And is there anything I missed before we sign off? Is there anything else that I should?
You know, just the last thought I had was, you know, not all the meetings, some of the meetings are painful or intense, but when you are doing rounds, it also creates space for that. You know, some issues are tough to deal with and people have feelings about them. So it's you know, when you say peaceful meetings, they're supportive meetings where both
Uh,
easy things can get said and hard things can get said. So I don't want to make it sound like this is all nice. It can be tough too, but you know, what's the container for dealing with tough stuff?
right. So that we don't
Uh,
have yelling and people walking out and slamming
right,
doors and yeah,
right,
and
right.
indeed, we can work through things and solve them as
Yeah.
people. And I think we can do great things together when we solve these kind of problems without.
And when you know you're going to get listened to, you can sit there more calmly because you know your turn will come. You know that people are listening to you, really listening to you when you talk. That's a difference too.
Indeed. Indeed.
All right.
Well, I have to say it all sounds awesome. So thank you so much. And
All right.
until
That's it.
next time, everybody, be powerful.